Good afternoon, one and all. Whew, that was a rush. We just about made it on time. We've just completed an hour and a half of EdXL GCSE paper 2, and you guys very kind of you to be so are here for AQA. So we've just switched over the transmission, as it were. What a rush. I mean, I haven't moved from my seat, but nevertheless, it's one of those things. I'm James, if you don't know me. Really good to see you. Teachers out there, really appreciate you being here and having your students join in. Students, I know it's busy at the moment. You've got a lot going on with exams, and we're here to help. I hope this proves fruitful for you. We've got a lot of material to cover this afternoon in this AQA Paper 2 session, and I want to stress to you I am going to go deep in the weeds today, okay? I've not filled this up with massive notes pack. I want to go deep into things like classification skill. What else are we doing? Guidance, I think, or whatever is coming up. We're going to go deep into those. I'm going to really focus on skills. I warn you now, guys, you are going to be scribbling, and it almost feels like a dictation session in some ways. I hope that's okay. I think it's probably in some ways better than me just flashing up a PowerPoint slide or whatever. You're seeing me do it, and hopefully you can model it off the back of what I'm doing. My handwriting's not great, however. So we're doing that. In return, guys, is an utterly free session. So in return, I'd urge you, please do hit like on the YouTube video, and do consider subscribing to the YouTube channel. We're really trying to boost that, get past 15,000 subscribers at the moment. We're not far off, a couple of hundred away, and you guys can help us with that. I mean, getting that followership on YouTube actually really makes a difference to us. So if you can find it in your heart to do that, we would really value it. Thank you very much. Thirdly, we have live chat available today. It's not on YouTube. We don't open that up. God, I bet we did that once. It was ridiculous. But what we do have is on the hub page, we have a little chat bot down the bottom right hand corner. Marta's with me in the studio, and she's going to pick those questions up and bring them to me in the intermission, or indeed at the end. Now, we do expect this session to go close to the full hour and a half, so we will definitely finish by 6 o'clock. I'm shattered. I've been up working since 6 this morning, so we're definitely finishing at 6 o'clock, and this will be my third hour of teaching in a row. But nevertheless, we'll finish on time. But phone's ringing, Marty. But we will get there. Now, other things, folks. Can I stress to you, you do need the note pages available to you for this particular session, all right? So if you haven't got them, get them onto your tablet with your Apple Pen, or I've got my Samsung one here that I'm using, or indeed get yourselves a printed version of those notes. It'll make a big difference to you. And finally, folks, as I've mentioned already, I'm going to focus a lot on skills in this session, and it's going to be really thorough. So hopefully you'll see the reasons for that as we go through, and hopefully this will prove really legitimate preparation for you before your paper 2 exam. Now, I've already spoken too much, so unless Marta tells me otherwise, I'm going to try and switch streams. You happy?
Yeah.
I think Georgina wants taken to work. I think that's what that call was.
Probably.
So I'm going to switch streams here, and hopefully this is going to work nicely. This is a bit where I get nervous, because this is where, folks, when I switch the canvas, we are switching microphones too, so you might just adjust your volume, all right? So just be prepared for that. We've got a really creaky chair, so I'm trying not to. All right, guys, here we go. Let's get stuck into this, folks. Obviously, we're here for paper 2. We all know that. Hopefully, you guys have got a bit of a sense of what these sessions are about. I want to stress, and I want to emphasise pretty much straight away, we are here for both the knowledge of the exam, and obviously we're dressed up here to make sort of AO1 knowledge and making sure you guys are sort of competent in terms of what's required of you. But also, I really want you to focus on this aspect of the session. Now, I'll come to that point almost immediately, but we're going to focus a lot on skills in this session. So there will be elements of this where it feels like we're being quite repetitive in some ways, like we're going over lots of justifications, for example, but the idea of that is it's high impact and high value for you guys, so go with it, okay? Secondly, you really need to be doing the session with the notes page in front of you, either on your tablet or with your thingy pen, or obviously in a hard copy and you writing on top of them. So you need to be doing that. Secondly, and I'll show you these immediately, actually, have the exam infographics available to you. They're valuable. We've written a national mock exam paper for paper 2, and you've got the paper, the mark scheme, and the model answers. Now, a couple of things I want you to be aware of is, obviously, we're going to be covering this material in the session today, and obviously I've mentioned skills to you a couple of times. I want to just remind you of what the infographic actually looks like, okay? So if I just hide that a second, you'll see, oops, that one was not meant to be there yet. Let me get rid of that one. I was meant to come back to that. If I come back to here, look, we're saying that we're going to go over classification of skill first. Well, why? Why are we going to do that?
Well, one of the reasons we're going to do that is that it's a really, really significant topic for us. In fact, it's the most assessed topic across a range of papers. We're going to do a lot of kind of covering explanations today. Why? Because other than identifying things and stating stuff, explaining is the key skill in this paper. You're also going to notice that we're going to do a lot of skills that relate to kind of like 4-mark answers and picking up that kind of explanation 4-marker type model. Why? Because that's a high impact aspect of our behaviour. And if you look down to the most dominant skill in the very last paper, it was in fact explaining that is on the trend upwards. Now, you also saw a second ago, if I just get rid of that layer a second and open this one for you, I just want to take you into thinking about something like classification of skill, the very first topic we're going to study here. The way I'm presenting this to you is not just, hey, it's always on the paper kind of thing. No. Well, what we can say is it is commonly on the paper. You'll see it's multiple marks on every paper since 2018. That doesn't make any guarantees. Maybe it isn't on the paper this year. Who the heck knows, right? But this is the point I want to make. This is a very, very commonly assessed topic. Moreover, it's commonly assessed, and fair play to AQA, consistently assessed. 22, over half of these 43 marks have come from the justify skill. So yes, you're going to get me defining stuff and you're going to get me describing stuff. Absolutely fine. We're going to do some of that. But the majority of our time is going to spend justifying this business of classification of skill. And I just want you to be aware of that, not to kind of show off of, oh, here's all of our data analysis. No, I want to show you this so you have an understanding of what lies behind the decisions we make coming into these sorts of sessions, okay? So I just want you to think about that. Now, with all that understood, let's actually zoom our way into classification of skill. And I'm actually just going to make the screen a little bit bigger for us. And we're going to start, first of all, describing and defining these continua. That's the lesser marks. And then guess what we're going to do? We're going to get into classifying, placing, and we're going to get into justifications because that's the majority marks. So let's make sure we understand basic and complex skills. Well, basic skills, folks, involve few decisions. So you can start to think, well, they often are closed, for example, but there's few decisions. We sometimes refer to them as habitual skills. We kind of do them the same over and over again. And we can say there is little thought. There is, of course, thought with a basic skill. Of course there is, but there's not a lot of that thought. And there's little, if I was to put little interpretation, so I've just sort of done a little slash there. So we've got little thought, little interpretation for our more basic skills. Now, what about if I go up the other end to complex skills? It's obviously the opposite here. We've got many decisions, so lots of decision making during the actual performance of the skills. The skill is often adapted, and it's adapted to suit the specific circumstances in which it's been performed. And we've got lots of thinking and interpretation of the scenario. Okay, so that is what we mean by a complex skill. Let's go on to our open and closed skills. What do we mean by a closed skill? We're saying with a closed skill, there are few environmental stimuli. So this is something which is not changeable dependent on the situation that's being performed. Think about things like a shot put, for example, or putting a shot, I should say, really. That is pretty much done the same. There might be some very marginal changes here and there, but that's more decided in advance. During the actual performance and explosion of that skill, very little changes from repetition to repetition to repetition to repetition. In fact, the word repetition is actually a useful one here. Whereas open skills, we can describe this as having many environmental, don't know why I go Welsh for that, stimuli. Okay, so you probably already start to think, okay, well, our open skills are quite often are complex skills. Very often. There are a couple of exceptions to that, actually, and I'm not going to get into that nuance right now. If you think about it, if you want to, and see what you can come up with, there are some exceptions, but generally our complex or open skills, generally our basic are closed skills in many cases, not in all, but in many. Now, let's keep going. What is a self-paced skill? Well, a self-paced skill is one where the performer initiates. Okay, so in other words, this is a badminton player choosing the moment to serve. Yeah, there are some conditions around that. They can't keep everyone waiting forever, but the performer initiates, and the performer controls the rate. Okay, so that second one, think about that as something like an 800-meter runner. They control the rate that they're going to run at. There are some sort of external factors, like the gun going at the start, for example. It could be an attack from another opponent, but the performer themselves controls the rate. Whereas an externally paced skill is when the environment, maybe I shouldn't use that word, it's more towards the open skill, but environment initiates the need for the skill. So think about defending a corner in football or a short corner in hockey. The environment dictates when you go and make your block, when you jump for your header, not in hockey. God. It also it controls. So if we also say the environment controls the rate, because you've got to get to a certain place to respond to a certain situation. And our gross and our fine skills are perhaps the easiest ones to think about. Our gross skills are performed with large, let me choose a different colour, with large muscle groups, and we're also talking about these being done for things like endurance, strength. That's what we mean with a gross skill. Strength, it's endurance, it's power. Speed's an interesting one, because speed can actually be more to do with dexterity, things like the fingers, that can lead to fine. But speed, as in legging it down a track, that would also fit into obviously a gross skill. Whereas a fine skill tends to be small muscle groups, more intricate movements, small muscle groups. We are talking here about accuracy. We are talking here about precision. Think about something along the lines of the sort of the fine control an archer or a pistol shooter or something has when they're kind of like bringing their weapon, I suppose, into the sort of the release moment, the firing moment, that sort of intricacy, those small, tiny adjustments, those are very, very fine skills. Now, with that in mind, what we can do is we can start going about now effectively classifying skills. So the first one I've got here is I've got dribbling past an opponent in hockey. How would we go about classifying that? And obviously we'll justify as we go. So I'm going to say that first of all, because we are dribbling past opponents and because the spaces are determined by the scenario that we are in, I'm going to say that this is a complex skill. Okay, so it's a complex skill. It's complex because we've got to make lots of decisions. That's where the space is. That's where I'm going to attack. Okay, that space is closing. I'm going to switch direction. I'm going to move the ball to here, etc. That's a complex skill because we're making decisions as we perform. Secondly, by the way, there will be certain set moves, but of course they're always environmentally impacted as well. Therefore, it's more of an open skill. Okay, now I'm not going extreme ends in either case. There are some kind of, say, set plays and some set decisions, but generally speaking, it's an open skill. Is it self or externally paced? It's externally paced because the environment dictates when and how the dribble should be initiated, and also the rate it's going to be done at. In other words, it's going to be where the space is, right? Generally speaking, and is it a gross or a fine skill? I found this one quite interesting. I went just towards gross, but I went not too far, near the middle. Now, it's gross in the sense that we've got large muscles of the arms sort of pumping the ball down towards the ground, but we've also got that fine control of the fingers. Now, I wouldn't be surprised if some of you had that maybe up here a little bit, not maybe too much, but a little bit up there. Now, what we're going to do, and again, this is one of the areas where I said we're going to go nice and steady. I'm going to jump to here, and what we're going to do is this is skill 1 for us. Notice this is skill 1. What we're going to do is we're going to go down here, and I'm going to change up my yellow because it's hard to read. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go basic or complex. Well, what we're saying is it's complex. Now, we have been asked to justify that key skill. So what do I need to do in that environment to get us over the line? We need to use our because it's a closed, that's a C for closed, because, well, why is it a closed skill? Why is it a complex skill? Because we have to interpret position and movement, and I'll just leave that there, but that would be of teammates and opponents, and also where space is opening and closing. Now, is it open or a closed skill? Well, it's an open skill. So we'll let me undo that. We will go for an open skill. And we'll say it's O, it's open. Why is it open? Because, there's my skill again, the position, the position of teammates and opponents, I'll just put oppo and oppo, dictate. So it's open because we do the dribble because of the scenario that's around us. Therefore, is it self or externally paced? Well, we're going to go for EP, externally paced. Why? Because the rate of the dribble, I'm going into sort of shorthand, rate of dribble caused by position of others. Okay, position of others. Now, finally, we're going to go into, is it a gross or a fine skill? Now, I said it was sort of in between, so I'm going to go for more G, more gross, because, and now it's all about my justification, because large muscles of the arms, push ball downwards. Now, on that one again, I want to say you can have a pretty good justification of saying it's more fine skill. You know, you've got the fingertips kind of controlling the ball, manoeuvring it slightly. Folks, I'm so sorry, a yawn came over me and I couldn't do anything about it. But what I'm trying to say there is that your justification of the skill is the key. In my opinion, that is more of a gross skill. And I've justified it as such. Large muscle groups of the arm pushing the ball down. That's a fair amount of sort of power being used to do that. But you could make an equivalent justification of it being at least more fine. What about a swimming front crawl? Very, very different classification this time. So is it basic or is it complex? Well, we're going to argue that it's more of a basic skill. Why? Because there's relatively few decisions to make. Is it open or closed? It's a closed skill. Or certainly it's a more close skill. Why? Because the environment isn't changing. Apart from the water kind of rumbling and a bit of wave drag being created, which is completely standard in swimming, there are a few environmental stimuli. Yeah, your opponent might go on a bit of a burst, but it depends on the nature of the race. Is it self-paced or is it externally paced? Well, except for the start of the race and the need to turn, this is a self-paced skill where the performer decides the rate at which they perform. In fact, I'm just going to bring it up a little bit because obviously we've got the swim start, which is externally paced. Is it gross or a fine? Well, it's really down the gross end. There are specific intricate movements of accuracy and precision. The specific movement of the hand under the body in the S-shaped sweep. We've also got sort of like the actual finger position that we hold to make that sort of cup angle of the hand. But generally this is a gross skill because we're pulling against the water with our hips, with our shoulders. These are large muscle groups. So let's go about justifying that. How are we going to do that? So skill 2, folks, we're thinking again about our justification. Why is this a basic skill? We're going to put basic because there are very few decisions. We could say things like no need for adaptation, no need for interpretation. Okay, there's very, very few of that, a little of that. Is it open or closed? It's closed. Why? It's closed because there are very few environmental stimuli. Sorry about my writing, folks. I do try my best. Stimuli. Okay, moreover, is it an externally or a self-paced skill? Well, of course, we could say if this was about the swim start, it would be externally paced, of course. But the swimming itself is self-paced. Why is it self-paced? Because, again, there's my key skill, there's my justification. Because the rate is determined by the swimmer. Okay, if the swimmer decided to go faster or slower, that would be the rate being determined by them, I suppose. And I suppose whether they're fatigued or not, I guess. Is it gross or fine? We're saying it's gross because, and let's be as specific as can be, we've got large muscles, and I'm going to say here, of let's say gluteals and hip flexors performing leg kick. Now again, I'm not necessarily suggesting you should get into the specific muscle groups performing leg kick, but my point is I'm justifying, aren't I? I'm saying, well, if those muscles are doing the leg action, then by definition they're some of the biggest muscles in the body. Actually, the hip flexors aren't, but the gluteals are, and therefore we're getting sort of large muscle group involvement. Now, let's keep going. Tennis itself, a lot of controversy over this one, folks. Not that you students need to know, but lots of people argue the tennis serve is a complex skill. It isn't. It's a basic skill. Why? Because there are very, very few decisions. It could move slightly that way if you got a gust of wind literally during the ball toss, or your opponent made a dramatic movement to their left or right, and you saw it and had to interpret it, then it would it would shift slightly towards away from the extreme end, but it would still be a basic skill. We do it habitually, repetitively, and very few kind of external factors influence how we do that. Now, is it open or closed? It's generally speaking a closed skill. Why? There's few environmental stimuli. Yes, it could move slightly that way if it was a very, very windy day or something like that, but those gusts would have to be literally between the ball going into the air and you striking it. Is it a self or externally paced skill? It's mostly a self-paced skill, although there are time restrictions in tennis and you have to serve within a particular moment of time. Rafa Nadal springs to mind. Is it a gross or a fine skill? Well, I went sort of here. I think it's a gross skill, but if we were talking about a first serve, it might be here, and if we were talking about a second serve, it might be more here, okay, because of course then the accuracy is more important. The first serve is more about that kind of power and getting a good sort of strike, or it could be to do with spin, I suppose, but it would get us there. Obviously, things like spin and manipulation would move it slightly up this end. Now, a serve's never going to get into this territory, okay, unless I suppose it's a sort of an underarm, very slicey kind of thing. But even then, we're talking about arms, whole swings. But nevertheless, now let's get into our justification. I know that I'm dragging this out, guys, but it is actually relevant that we do this because A, it's a very commonly assessed thing, and B, this justification skill is a really useful one. This use of this because is going to be really useful for you. Now, is it basic or complex? Well, I'm going to say it's a basic skill again. I know some people are going to disagree with me, but there you go. And what we're going to say is it should say because there are near zero decisions. Now, I'm going to say during the serve. Okay, so yes, the decision about which side I'm going to hit it, but that happens beforehand. But it's because there's almost no decision to make. Is it open or closed? Well, it's closed because there are very few environmental stimuli. By the way, a nice way to think about both a basic and a closed skill. There are exceptions, by the way, but a basic and a closed skill, generally speaking, you can practice it on your own. Now, that is not a type of practice method, but think about going to a tennis court and just hitting serve after serve. Try that with a return. How are you going to do that? Okay, you might get a serving machine or something like that. The point is you can't. So a closed skill, a basic skill, very often are exceptions, will be able to perform with no one else. You just go and have a go. Now, not that this is advisable because of safety, but a gymnastics vault, for example, is a basic and a closed skill. Now, theoretically, you could perform it on your own in a gym. Now, don't do that because it's dangerous. If you trip over and bang your nut, it's going to be a problem. But the point is, technically speaking, you could. Now, is it self or externally paced? Generally speaking, serving is self-paced. Why? Because it's initiated by the performer. Yes, there are restrictions. They've got a time limit, as we said before, but that's why it's self-paced. Is it gross or fine? We're going to say mostly gross, especially the first serve. I wonder if you could get a question and it could differentiate between first and second serve. I don't know. But especially the first, which uses large groups for power. Okay, and there's my justification. There's my key skill. Last one, folks. Let's do this in some kind of blue. Let me go to a blue. Let me do this some kind of blue. That will do the trick. Okay, we've got throwing a dart. Is it basic or complex? Well, it's right down here at the extreme basic. Very few decisions once the action is in motion. Is it open or closed? It's very closed, even more closed than our tennis serve. Nothing's going to change in that environment. Is it self or externally paced? It's self-paced. The performance determines entirely the initiation, the rate of that. Is it gross or fine? It's right up the fine end. But of course, we do have the arm movement itself, but the finger movement, the accuracy, the precision, all leads it to be a fine skill. Let's justify those things. What have we got? Is it basic or complex? It's basic. Why? Because the board, the dartboard, that is static. If it was moving and bouncing around, then you'd have a different thing to have to do with it. And the distance is equal. Okay, so the board is not moving about, it's not coming towards you, it's staying in the same position. Is it open or closed? Well, it's closed. Why? Because there's nothing changing. Because nothing changes. Now, someone would say, well, what if your dart is in the way? You've already thrown one and it's blocking the treble 20 or something like that. Well, yeah, that is a factor, but as soon as you've made your decision ahead of your throw, what you're going to do is habitual and consistent. You're going to go for treble 19 or whatever. So nothing changes in the environment. Okay, there's a bit of noise, especially if you're playing in Frimley Green. I should know Frimley, but there you go. Is it self-paced or externally paced? It's self-paced. Why? I'm just going to say as above. It's because it's initiated by the performer. Is it fine or gross? It's fine because small muscle groups create precision. Now, folks, you're probably already bored sick of me going over that particular set of skills, and I make no apologies for it because it's actually really important that we do that. In fact, we're going to go into another topic now where we're going to do a different skill, this time not justification but evaluation. Now, folks, let's have a think about our second topic. And in a lot of ways, we've got a similar sort of environment here. I've given you the key information already. You've got very clear descriptions of what a visual guidance, a verbal guidance, a manual, a mechanical would be. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go through the process of evaluating. Now, again, coming back to what we looked at earlier, if I just go right way back up the top here, if I just get rid of that particular view, you'll see that you'll see in here that we've got this really important sort of skill of evaluating. Is it as important as explaining and identifying? No, but it's a clear requirement, and what we need to do is be able to understand when we get the evaluate command, what does that mean of us? So with that in mind, we're going to go down here, back to here, and what we're going to do is we're going to assume knowledge of guidance. We will use it as we go over this, but what we're going to do here is we're going to look at evaluative points, and evaluative points mean that we've got positives and negatives and we need to reach some form of conclusion. So let's go through visual guidance, which of course we know is providing a mental picture. It's a demonstration, it's a video, it could be a wall chart or a guide or a sort of a brochure. That's a weird word to use. Why is this positive? It's really good for groups. So demonstrations work really well with groups. This is why they're so common in things like P lessons, for example. Also, they provide what's called a mental picture for participants. Performers can see what this thing is meant to look like. Therefore, it's particularly important to beginners. Sometimes we call these cognitive stage learners. Also, about a demonstration, one of the positives, it's repeatable. And of course, it could be repeatable, and we'll come to verbal guidance second. It could be that it's combined with other forms of guidance, such as verbal. Now, there are problems with this type of guidance, though. There are negatives. Well, the first one is, what is the quality of the demo? Now, this is probably the biggest, and obviously it varies from demonstration to demonstration. But what is the actual quality like? I'll tell you a little story here. I'm not a basketball player, but I taught PE my whole career. I used to teach basketball in my P lessons, and I never played it as a kid anyway, so I honed these skills. I worked on them on my own, got better shooting, dribbling, Anyway, I demonstrated this layup, and I'm not very good at it, and anyway, every kid had this sort of flawed layup technique as a result afterwards. It's quite embarrassing. At least they tried. Now then, other issues. We can also cause info overload, and what I mean by that is watching a whole performance demonstration is an issue, and therefore it's a lot of information taken in. That's why that repeatability matters. Moreover, it's not relevant or not as relevant for our elite performers. Sometimes we call these autonomous learners, but it's not relevant, not as relevant, because of course they don't necessarily need to see what it looks like because they themselves have performed it many, many times. Now, let's go back and let's look at our verbal guidance, our coaching points, our instructions. Why are they positive? Well, first of all, they provide clarity. Okay, and we often do them in combination. So we often do them in combination. What will we combine our coaching points with? Well, very often it will be some kind of demonstration. It doesn't have to be. It could be manual or mechanical guidance, but we'll often put them in combination. This is what we refer to as cueing. You know, we perform the basketball layup and we say, okay, please watch my feet and see how they step. Not in my case, but that's what we might do. We might focus on one element. Okay, so it could be that we just provide coaching points on one particular element. And the other thing, I haven't really got space for it here, it can be done for either individuals, you know, like individual coaching, or groups. So that verbal guidance can become quite specific to an individual, or it can be used sort of efficiently for groups. But there are problems. What have we got here? Well, again, if it's not done properly, we've got info overload. That's an issue with verbal guidance. Also, verbal guidance lacks a picture. Okay, so it doesn't provide a mental picture unless it's combined, of course. It can cause confusion, and that often comes down to the language that's used by the coach. And I'm just going to put here, language is a blunt tool. And what we mean by that is what has meaning to one person may have far less meaning when described to another person. If I got into very lofty, elevated sort of degree level sports science language in the session, it might not feel as relevant to you, right? And that's the same when we're given coaching points. We need to perform those coaching points. There's a really nice theory about this from Donaldson. It's called Human Sense if you're interested. It doesn't matter for this course, but we have to put those coaching points in the language and the framework of the recipient. And that's actually an interesting overall point of communication in general in life, actually. Now, we've also got our manual. This is when, let's say, a swimming teacher is manipulating the performer's leg action in breaststroke or something like that, or it's spotting or a hand holding trampolining. Why is this helpful? Well, first of all, a performer can experience early kinesthesis. So what I mean by that is before they're actually ready to perform, let's say, a somersault on a trampoline, they can feel what it's like because they're supported. Also, it's really good for safety. Okay, so often safety will be the determiner for manual guidance, sort of holding a hand or guiding or spotting. That's often why. It therefore can lead to much better confidence of a performer to try something. And also, it's really good when we're in the one-to-one scenario. That's a positive, by the way, up there. Now, of course, there are negatives as well. It's not much good for groups. It doesn't really work. If you've got a group of performers and you're manipulating the legs of one, it's not going to benefit the other. Another point is about permission. Now, there's no technical reason that without permission, without supervision, this manual guidance shouldn't be done. It's a completely legitimate methodology, but of course those things do need to be achieved. Pace is an issue. In other words, this slows down learning quite a bit because it takes time to do this. Now, it can be impact, and that's useful. And the other thing is removal can cause worsening. Now, I'm not going to get into performance curves and all that. It's for another day, another qualification. But if you're doing lots of manual guidance and then you remove that, the actual action can be lost, and therefore the progress can be lost. So it's about when you remove it. And if you remove it at the wrong time, that manual guidance, it can be detrimental. Now, mechanical, that use of aids, ropes, parachutes, bowling machines, whatever. Why are these useful? Well, we get an increase in safety. That's great. Think about a crash mat and trampolining, for example. We also get an earlier experience of whole skill. Now, again, that's a W there of whole skill. I made it worse. So we get to do that rotation early, even though we might not be that ready because we've got the trampoline harness on. The other thing, and I think we often miss this one, is getting the trampoline harness out, the bowling machine out. It's quite exciting, it's quite novel, it feels quite modern. People really enjoy it and excited. If you went to a table tennis practice and you could either hit and hit and hit with an opponent, or you could go and work with the robot, what would you want to do? And I think there's a nice sort of, well, who knows what you want to do, but that's a nice thing. Other thing, it can be considered, on the negative side, it can be considered slow progress. So it takes time, or it can slow progress down. And also, especially when we remove. So when we get removal, this slow progress can then kick in. The other thing is it's completely temporary. So we can't play a tennis match with a serving robot, not yet at least. So it's a temporary influence. And one of the things that I think you also should add into here, it's often to do with expense or availability. Do you have a parachute bungee to sprint with? Probably not. Most people don't. Therefore, there's a certain exclusivity to those things. Now, again, what we're going to do here is we'll just make sure that we can get our answers into the right framework here. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to think about, okay, what kind of guidance is being done in these scenarios, and we're going to explain effectively what's occurring and why. So let's see this. Year 7 students learning a badminton serve with a demo within a P lesson. Well, clearly that's a visual. Okay, so that's a visual type of guidance. We've got that. And why is this being done? Well, it's being done because the demo provides a mental picture for students to copy. So there's my key skill. Now we're doing sort of explanations here. We've done evaluations bit above. Therefore, obviously, you're getting some of these key skills built into what we're talking about here. Let's go further. England rugby team with a scrum practice. Now I'm going to assume they're using a scrummaging machine, so I'm going to go for mechanical. Okay, so mechanical. Why? Because they work with a scrummaging machine. If you're not sure what these are, by the way, you can Google what a scrummaging machine is. A completely standard mechanical guidance at sort of higher level rugby. They work with a scrummaging machine, which causes the team, or the scrum, I suppose, to be able to practice as an 8, to be able to practice as an 8. And what I mean by that is because they're using the scrummaging machine, they don't have to separate into, okay, we're going to work on mini scrums with 4 of the 8 against the other 4. No, they're going to get the whole 8 on one side working against the machine and the resistance. So that works really nicely for us. What about a large elite squad training being given instructions? Well, of course, what we're talking about there is that's verbal. And we're given scenarios here where they're all done in isolation. Often these will be combined because the coach can give specific, I'm going to put CPs for coaching points. CPs can give specific coaching points and goals to the team and players. So we really like the verbal instruction for this because it can be used for whole team instructions like tactics, but you can also go to your goalkeeper or defender or whatever it happens to be and go, I want you to do this. Okay, this is your role specifically. So verbal works really nicely for that type of environment. And finally, gymnastics supports a handspring. So obviously we're getting manual guidance here. So the coach is doing some kind of support. By the way, I've done this many times in my career. Why? Because the handspring can be dangerous, is dangerous, trust me, can be dangerous, and an experienced coach, let me just change colour, experienced coach can ensure safety, or that no one gets hurt, you might want to say. So there's our explanation of those things. Now, we're also asked here, and this, by the way, this is an explain question. Why? Because we've got the how aspect to it. So how is always linked to explaining. So let's get into this. How would you use verbal guidance differently if you were coaching a group of beginners compared to an elite athlete? So we've got sort of like a explanation and a comparison. I'm not going to write this out into sentences. I'm going to give you the nutrition of this answer, and I'll ask you to put it into your format. Now I'm going to make I'm looking for 4 points in my answer. Okay, so the first point I'm going to make is I'm going to talk about type of language. So the first point I'm going to make is that I'm going to use different types of language, and what I mean by that is it's going to be more or less technical. So obviously my coaching points with the experienced high-level performers is going to be more technical language. For the novices, it's going to be much more to do with sort of simple instructions. My second point that I'm going to build into my answer, I'm going to talk about the number of points. And what I mean by this is that with my beginners, I'm going to do fewer coaching points, but with my experienced performers, I could, if I want to, use more coaching points because they're used to that, because they've got a good technical knowledge. Thirdly, another difference is I'm going to do it with or without a demo. So of course, when I do my coaching points for my beginners, I'm going to combine it with a demo and use that queuing methodology. With the experienced performer, I may well not do that. And then fourthly, if we now go into sort of what we call error correction. So we're going to use guidance when we're doing error correction. You got this wrong, try this. Now what we're going to do here is that we've got two different types of error correction. We've got gross error correction, which is where like literally your foot's in the wrong position. We've got gross error correction. That's going to be done by, obviously, done with the beginners. And you've also got fine error correction. Now what I mean by this is that this second one, this is going to be for our experienced performers, and this is all about refinement. So you might find that literally limbs are in the wrong place here with gross error correction with the beginners, and here you're going to find that something very subtle has to change, and I would form that into my explanation. I've got the reasons that they are different. Now folks, I will cover this really quickly, and I'm aware we're only on 3 topics, but trust me, we've done the big bit of today's session. We've done the air quotes hard bit. Let's look at aggression and let's move this on. So what is direct aggression, first of all? Well, direct aggression is any form of aggression involving physical contact. So this, for example, is when, well, let's go through it. So we might go for something, I don't know if this is a fair term, but we're going to go for a maximal tackle in rugby. Completely fair, but what we're doing is we're really hitting the opponent hard and forcing them back, hitting them, full on, square on, properly arms wrapped, etc., head to the right side, etc., but we're really making that impact. Another one would be a jab to the chest. A jab to the chest in boxing. This is direct aggression. Again, completely standard behavior in boxing, but it's something which is direct physical contact between opponents. Now then, indirect aggression can often be considered to be like the scapegoat theory of this. And what I mean by this is when aggression is taken out on an object. Okay, so the aggression is taken out on an object, and this is important to gain an advantage. Okay, so it's not just done because you're frustrated lobbing your racket in the crowd or something. Don't do that, but you're doing it because it gains you an advantage. So what would be examples of this? A really nice one with something like body line bowling. Now in my mind I'm thinking cricket, but I suppose this could be baseball related or softball related. But body line bowling, literally firing the ball at the body of the batsperson. That would, especially if it get hit with the ball, that would be indirect aggression. And secondly, this one I think is a good one. We smash an overhead shot, let's say in tennis, at the opponent. Now, if you think about the situation where you've played a tennis point, you've worked your opponent into a sort of a really weak position, and the ball's lobbed up as a defensive shot, and you could smash it down the corner or whatever, but this time you smash it directly at your opponent, even though you've got the choice not to. And that could be considered sort of an idea of intimidation. Okay, or aggression and intimidation. That's what we mean by indirect aggression. Okay, change.
Well, there we go. It might not feel like we've got very far, guys, but those are massive topics. and topics that will stand us in really good stead. Look, no one knows what's going to be in your paper. I definitely don't know what's going to be in your paper, but we can certainly say that things like skill classification have been really, really commonly assessed, as you saw earlier, which is why we include it. Could there be a year without it? Of course there could. But it's really worthwhile, and obviously that justifies skill. It's a really, really valuable one for us to be able to look at. Marta, any comments, any requests, any questions?
We've got a couple of shout-outs. The first one's for Withington Girls' School.
I've just seen it. Yeah,
School
WGS.
department reminding the girls that yes, there is revision sessions. Yes, so
are you sure?
I hope.
Yeah, Withington Girls.
Yes, Withington Girls.
Yeah, Withington's Manchester, I think, isn't it? I've got a feeling it's not too far from Stockport, but I hope I'm not getting that wrong. I might be wrong. I know there's a Withington, and also there's also a Withington in Cheltenham, I believe, as well.
All right.
But anyway, yeah.
And another shout.
I had my second ever teaching job, PE teaching job interview, not far from there. I'm trying to remember the name of the school. I didn't get the job, but what was it? I want to say it was in a place called Glossop. I might be making that up. It's about 26 years ago, so it's a long time ago. Anyway, they binned me or custard pie me and didn't want me.
Yeah.
Bastard. Anyway,
the second shout out goes to Newcastle High School for Girls, where the girls have gone into school during half term.
Yeah, sorry.
We've got a picture there.
I've just seen the picture.
Of the girls working really hard during the revision, so hats off.
I am going to say that is a really nice classroom. That is a really, really nice classroom.
Like a top-notch building.
Yeah, that looks like
none of those 1970s.
To you guys up in Newcastle, I'm going to say I've got a feeling, because I think I used to play cricket near there, because I've got a feeling you guys might be in Jesmond, which I think is where the Newcastle Cricket Club is. When I was Lyle Kid in Carlisle, I used to play cricket over that way. Okay. Anyway, doesn't matter. But anyway, where was I going with this? I did notice those chairs look very, very good lumbar support.
Really?
That's what I've noticed. You don't often get that in school chairs. It's one of the things. School chairs, gym benches, not that they're gym benches. But brilliant, yeah, thank you guys, and thank you for trying. I think they're a GDST school, aren't they? Newcastle.
I'm not sure, yeah, possibly.
Yeah, I think so. But anyway, thank you guys, really appreciate it. And wow, coming into school, you maniacs.
Yeah.
We appreciate it. We're at work as well. So yeah. Now, Marto, I believe we've got in the region about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, so that'll work quite neatly. Did we have any questions? Did anybody pose any queries?
No, not at the moment. Possibly at the end, but at the moment, yeah.
I just want to reiterate that point again, guys, of the skill focus of the sessions. I know I'm banging on about it, but I really do want to get... but I do want to get that point across. Marta, question, I think.
Sorry, quite an exciting shout out goes to the Alice Smith School. It's 12:15 a.m. in Malaysia.
What?
So shout out to the Alice Smith School.
I don't know if that's Miss Shepherd or not.
I don't know if it is.
But we...
As a non-visitor. But,
where is it? I'm sure I've got it here somewhere. We went to... I knew I had it. I saw it earlier. There you go, guys. The Alice Smith School over Kuala. We had the pleasure of joining and visiting you. Obviously, when was that, Marta? Back in last January, I want to say.
Yes, 2023, yeah.
January 2023, and you guys are, what a brilliant school, what a brilliant environment, and amazing hospitality shows as well. Big, Anna, hug, high five, shake of hand, delete as whatever is appropriate. But we always appreciate you guys. You guys are absolutely top of the pops as far as we're concerned. So we really appreciate you guys. Thank you very much for the shout out. And fantastic. Okay, we're going to get back into the session, and we're going to go over, and we're going to move on to sponsorship and media, another biggie, but we'll make much more rapid progress through the remaining topics. So let me line things up. Hopefully this is going to work. I'm going to try and stay with it. Last bit of the day, here we go.
Okay, we've got different types of media and sponsorship, folks. Let's go through them. And I sometimes feel a bit silly telling you about these types of media, to be honest, but we've got TV. We've got the press, which I guess we're talking about the written press there, newspapers, magazines, etc. I would also include things like, I suppose it spreads onto this next one as well. I would also include things like blogs and articles into this as well. The radio, don't underestimate this, especially with regard to sport. Radio is a very, very popular medium for engaging with broadcast sport, for example, especially when people are on the move and travelling. The other thing is we've got, air quotes, the internet. Now, that's quite a big concept, obviously, but we have numerous aspects of that. We have the combinations with social media, obviously. We've also got the idea that anyone can print, can record, can blog, can upload, and therefore we've got a lot of access to media in that sense. Now, we're also interested in the ideas of type sponsorship. So what do sponsors sponsor? They sponsor equipment. They sponsor things like facilities. If I didn't write so big. They sponsor things like clothing. They sponsor things such as, financial sponsorship, literally paying a club or a team. It's often an event. And it could well be that the stadia or a stadium is sponsored, for example. I'm sure you can come up with examples of those. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our explain skill again, one of those key requirements for us. We're looking at explain the relationship between sponsorship, media and sport. And I always feel like we should change this, and in here should be the word elite sport, because of course we're talking about elite sport, something that wants to be consumed through the media, for example. So let's go through this, and I'm going to write out a whole answer here. Maybe we'll mark at the end. In fact, let me just go a little bit bigger so we've got a bit of space to see this. I'm going to say the following. I'm going to say media companies, and I want to get my examples in, so I'm going to go for media companies, and I'm going to choose two. I'm going to say such as Sky, or you could go for BT, or what's it called, TNT Sports, but I'm going to say Sky Sports, or BBC 5 Live, which is a radio station. BBC 5 Live radio station, obviously by the BBC, so no adverts. But anyway, so what do? They pay sports. Such as WSL, so this is the Women's Super League, such as WSL, for the live broadcast rights and it could be highlights as well, but I'll go with the live broadcast rights. Live broadcast rights. Now you'll notice that what I'm saying here is that perhaps in my example, Sky Sports are paying for the rights to show games live through the TV, through the internet, and BBC 5 Live's paying for the rights to broadcast them through radio broadcast. Now you can imagine that the TV is a more expensive package, right? But nevertheless, both of these media companies are investing in that. Now then, the WSL, so we're now going on to say, in fact, let me change colour, because I'm now going on to sort of say what the sport is going to do with this. I'll go to a green. The WSL, that's the Women's Super League, invests this. So, literally WSL has received this money to provide the best possible air quotes show and spectacle. In other words, the WSL sort of use this money to create like a really enjoyable thing to watch, spectacle, with high quality matches. You'll notice that the bigger matches are often shown. Full-time players, effectively full-time professional players, which was not the case 10 years ago. Full-time players, etc. Now, I wouldn't encourage you to do an etc., but I'm going to use it there. Now, I'm going to go on to the sponsors and their role. I'll choose some kind of orange colour here. Sponsors pay, and I'm going to go for both in capitals. Again, you don't need to do this in a random. I'm trying to express it to you. Both the media company, in our case, let's say Sky Sports, the media company to display their adverts, and Elite Sport, WSL, and I should have just put WSL really, and Elite Sport to sponsor clothing, stadia or events. And you might want to be thinking about, well, why are they doing this? This allows the sponsors brand to be both, and again I'm going to use that term again, capitals, to be both visible, so more people see it and therefore desire it, and linked with a healthy and, let's say, positive symbol, and that being WSL football. So we would call this entire relationship here, we would call this commercialized, okay? So we've got effectively the media company is making its own profit by selling advertising space and perhaps TV subscriptions. You've also got the sponsor that's getting its brand out there, becoming a household name, for example, and you've got Elite Sport that's taking that money and is investing it both in the elite format, but presumably into grassroots sports as well. This is what we mean by the commercialized structure and the relationship. Obviously, you can talk about the golden triangle. I've described it and explained how it happens here. By all means, make reference to the golden triangle. That may well be a mark for you, and so on. Okay. Let's move things down. I want to get into conduct of performance, and there's a bit of nuance here, folks, so I sort of want us to pay attention. Technically, we're halfway through, although we're actually much further than that. What is etiquette? It's actually quite hard to define, isn't it, in some ways? But etiquette is what we call a convention, not people getting together in a hotel big room, but a convention like it's an unwritten rule, okay? And it's specific to that. So examples of when people follow an unwritten rule is when someone congratulates an opponent. When, for example, we could go for shaking hands after a match. Okay, this is not in the written rules, but it's a convention. People expect it. Now, sportsmanship has got a slightly different sort of notion to it, and it is the following. It is conforming to the rules, which we've not got over here in etiquette, the rules, spirit and etiquette. So what we mean by that is that, yes, sportsmanship is doing all of the etiquette stuff, but it's also sticking to the rules of the game, etiquette of a sport. So it's a bit of a broader term. Etiquette's really specific. It's just that kind of unwritten bit. That's what etiquette means. It's got nothing to do with the actual technical rules of the sport. So, for example, what would be an example of sportsmanship? Well, what we've got here is we've got kicking a ball out, I'm thinking of football here, out of play for an injury. Now, what I mean by that is an opponent perhaps is potentially injured and you choose to kick the ball out of play. It's not required of you, but you do it anyway, and it shows that kind of spirit of the play. I also think this is a good one. Walking in cricket. If you're not really sure what this is, speak to your teacher about the specifics about it. But walking in cricket is that even if no one else has noticed that you've edged the ball and you're out, you decide, well, I'm out, I'm walking, I'm going to go off. The other one I think is really nice. When I see this in lots of sports, we've got the idea of acknowledging a foul, not disputing it, not arguing it, not claiming it didn't happen, but yep, fair play. That would be a good sportsman-like, or sometimes people think they just bang to rights. Now, gamesmanship. Now, this is an interesting one. It's when we are gaining an advantage by stretching the rules. But notice we are not breaking the rules by stretching rules. We are not breaking those rules. They are being stretched to their limits. What would be an example? Well, in some sports, it is allowed to appeal to the referee. In fact, I'm going to say in some sports. In some sports, it's not and would be considered a foul or unsportsmanlike behaviour. But in lots of sports, appealing, trying to persuade a referee or an umpire or whatever that they should go with your side on their decision is legal. And it is not outside the rules, therefore it is allowed, but it is sort of trying to gain an advantage. You know, I see it all the time in the sport of football. There's like association foot soccer where people they know that balls come off them to go for a throw in a corner, and they try to convince an assistant referee, let's say, that no, it's their throw in or whatever it happens to be. Now look at this one. It's so hard to give examples of this. Slightly delaying play. Now, I've had to include the word slightly to make it not against the rules. If I'd said just time wasting, that's against the rules. You can't do that. And this one I think is an interesting one. How do you spell this? Is it like that? Exaggerating a foul. Notice we're not faking an injury. We're exaggerating a foul. That is within the rules of most sports. But is it gamesman-like? Yes, because you're trying to gain advantage. Oh man, one of the ones that does my head in these days is screaming. You know, people scream. I've heard this in rugby. I've heard this in football. I don't think I've heard it elsewhere. But people yelping and screaming, as if they're in a war. And anyway, let's not go down that road. Now, what is the contract to compete? Now, the contract to compete encompasses four things. It encompasses always trying hard. Okay, so when you take part in sport, there is an assumption that you and others will try hard, always allowing others to do the same. So honouring the fact that it's not just you that's trying your best, but other people as well. It's sticking to the rules. Come back to the sportsmanship, sticking to rules, and also it's respecting others, including officials, including coaches. That, in many ways, folks, defines sport, and we can call it the contract to compete. So let's take the top one, always trying hard. What about this one? Running a PB, personal best, in, let's say, 400 metres. Clearly, that is someone trying their absolute best. Another one, if I just put here, no gamesmanship. Gamesmanship is often can be defined as preventing someone else doing their best. We've got the idea of no deviance. Deviance is where we break the rules. We dope, we act aggressively. Hopefully we don't do these things, but those would be deviance. That contract to compete is almost a summary of those behaviours and what sport emerges as if they are followed. Now I'm going to take the briefest of pauses just to sip my tea. Lovely sip of tea. In fact, I'm still sipping it. Now then, I really want to focus this here. Okay, I really want us to think about the advantages and disadvantages of, we're assuming, illegal performance-enhancing drugs for the performer. And then we're going to extrapolate a little bit and look at perhaps how we could evaluate this for the sport, even an event where this might happen. Okay, so let's get into this first of all. Why do performers take drugs? I mean, that's a good question. Well, they do this because they get up arrow, increased chance of success or winning. I mean, this is a very, very simple point, but let's make no bones about it. That is why people dope. There are a couple of other exceptions: injury, recovery, these sorts of things. Well, they might also be considering the fame and the recognition they get by being the champ, I suppose. They might be thinking about the wealth. They might be thinking about the income generation of being that character. That's going to be something. But another argument is that it levels the playing field. Now, I don't want to get too deep into this because it's quite a sort of a neat little topic we've got here, but it's certainly the case that some very, very high-profile dopers have claimed this exact point. One of them, ironically, is Lance Armstrong, who claims that and it's an interesting thing to reflect on, that at some point he was a young athlete, a young, clean athlete who went into a sport of cycling and doped. Now, yes, we can blame him for that, but what were the cultural conditions that led to that? It's actually an interesting one. Was everyone else doing it, and therefore he felt like he had no choice or the only way to get to that level? Who knows? I'm not defending him, by the way. I'm not a fan, but nevertheless. Now, with the disadvantages, these are kind of obvious, right? We get reputational damage. Someone, once they're caught, is going to have their reputation ruined. I go back to Armstrong as a great example of that. It could be that they're sacked. It could be that they're banned. Obviously, loss of sponsorship is also going to happen here. Lose sponsorship. That's going to be caught doping. A sponsor won't have anything to do with them. They've also got associated health risks. They've also got the possibility of addiction. Now, those latter two very much depend on obviously the length of time the doping's been going on and how much has been done. One thing is worth saying, though, is that when athletes dope, they take massive quantities of the substance in question. Now, what we want to do is we want to start to think about, well, okay, are there any factors that we could almost lead to the sport here? Okay, what have we got in relation to the sport? Now, it's very easy to go to the sport and think, well, there's disadvantage, and I'll see if I can give you a couple of advantages as well. But what do we have? Well, we've got reputation damage. That's very much the same again. So we've got reputation damaged. We've also got the idea of suspicion. Successful performers in the future will be treated with suspicion. We've also got the idea of less sponsorship. Sponsors are not going to get involved. Media companies perhaps are not going to pay as much for a sport which people believe are doping. We might get down arrow fewer spectators. This means there's less money coming into the sport. We might get reduced participation. If a sport is really cynically been doping, then obviously people might feel less inclined to take that sport up. We've also got more spending on anti-doping. So in order to catch people, you've got to spend a lot more. Of course, that's going to require investment. You get a loss of trust. We also get historical results change. Okay, so you've got to strip titles and this sort of thing. And also, we've got the idea of honest athletes tarred. Okay, so some athletes will be clean, but they might be sort of tarred by association because they're in an era or in a period of time where doping is common. Now, the point I want to make to you folks is obviously what we've done there is we've looked at the performer in pink. There's all that stuff there. But what I've also done there is I've gone on and looked at the specific disadvantages to the sport. So what I'm going to try and do, hopefully I won't mess this up too badly, is I'm just going to try and kind of grab this material here. I'm going to grab that there. I'm going to Command-C, Command-V, and I'm going to drag the fella down. Hopefully this is going to, there you go, look at that. So what we're going to do here is we're going to place that. This stuff is disadvantages, obviously, to the sport and to the events. Okay, so we've got those disadvantages, and that's really what the question is likely to be. That's likely what you're going to get asked. But what could be potentially some are there any, in fact, advantages to sport of performers taking drugs? Now, we've got to be clear, we don't think that you're going to get a question on this, but I just want to cover bases. Well, could we put question mark, more spectacular? Could we argue that a sport is more, it is question mark, you've got faster times, you've got more spectacular hill climbs. Do these things become sort of viewable? And some people are actually trying to commercialise this at the moment. I don't know if you've come across these sorts of stories of effectively doped world championships where people are allowed to take what they want to take. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but it becomes, I'm not going to use that term, but it becomes a sort of like an experimental show of what can the human body do with all this kind of enhancement and what have you. Perhaps those are the advantages to sport, that for temporarily becomes saleable and media rights. So, but these benefits are very temporary. What are more permanent are these disadvantages, and that's where we want to really be drawing our attention. Okay, good stuff. Let's move on to health and fitness and the links between the two. I'm just going to bring the screen size down so we can see everything in context. What we're going to do here is we're going to go through social, physical and mental health and well-being, and we're going to look at the association with fitness. Why should people participate in physical activity? Why do we want them to do that? Well, let's start with social. It's the less fashionable one of these. Well, first of all, people get the opportunity to socialise, to meet new people, to meet people of different kinds. We can obviously make friendship groups. Friends is a really important part of life. Not that everyone needs to have lots and lots, but we've got this kind of enrichment to our life. Secondly, we've got the idea of cooperation. We cooperate often in team environments, even just sharing clubhouses, but also actually competing together. I'd also go on to say things like teamwork, I think, is an important part of this. You could also say things like leadership. Wherever there are groups of people, leadership needs to be displayed and followed. So there's some nice ones to add in there as well. Now, this last one, I don't really know where we're meant to go with this, but one of the social benefits is that we're meeting essential needs. Now, I'm not sure what they want me to tell you about that, so I'm just going to write it down. People get together and then essential needs are met. Not totally sure if I'm interpreting that the right way. What about the mental health benefits? Well, first of all, physical activity is a feel-good thing. And think about the sort of the serotonin hypothesis, that we get that sort of release of this feel-good, in this case neurotransmitter, and it makes us feel better. Fantastic. We get a cathartic effect. We get decreased stress. The word I used, by the way, there was cathartic. I'll chuck that in for you in case you want to be posh in your answers. Cathartic means it relieves stress. That is literally what it means. Now, also, one of the great things about participating in physical activity is we get better at controlling our emotions. We're better at being a sort of a more balanced person because we experience success, failure, and everything in between. What about the physical health? Well, We get an improved heart function, so our heart works well. Perhaps we prevent coronary heart disease. We get better increase in body systems efficiency, so the body systems themselves work better. We get a decreased risk of illness. Why? Because physical activity is strongly associated with the immune system, and therefore our immunity, specific immunity, is improved. We can also avoid lifestyle conditions like obesity. Therefore, that's got certain morbidities and illnesses that are associated with obesity. We can avoid them. And the other thing is we can do everyday tasks. So we can stretch to reach things, we can run to the bus, we can do the gardening, we can clean the car, we can walk to work, cycle to work, because we participate on a regular basis. Now, fitness is a slightly different question. The reasons for participation and the association with fitness are very, very simple. Participating in physical activity increases fitness. Okay, now that fitness could be quite varied. It could be flexibility, it could be muscular endurance, it could be strength. We also got a decreased tendency for injury. That is fantastic. One of the reasons that if we participate regularly, our fitness will be improved that way. And we've also got an increased capacity for manual tasks. Now, we've sort of touched on this already just below. But think about, for example, I reckon a lot of you will have part-time jobs, for example, and you might work at a restaurant or a kitchen or a shop or something like that. Think about standing on your feet for 8 hours a day. I'm telling you, I'm 47. You get to my age, that's flipping hard. And obviously, fitness and participating in physical activity can maintain that tendency over time. Now then, let's get on to the consequences of sedentary lifestyle. Nice, simple topic for us here. Let's just be clear what we mean by a sedentary lifestyle. Sedentary means sitting down, sitting, or lying down. Okay, that's what we understand by sedentary. And lifestyle is for extended periods. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with you at the end of a busy college or school day getting home, I'll put my feet up for an hour. Nothing wrong with that. That's completely normal. That's not a sedentary lifestyle. If you're walking to school, if you're doing a manual job, if you are playing sport, going to the gym, you are not sedentary. So we're talking about doing this too much. And one of the things that's interesting to reflect on is how our society is structured. If I was to chuck two words in here, schools, work, which of these are sedentary on average in their nature? Are schools active places? And I want you to think, not the bits in between where you walk to, go on your bike from, not the bit at break time where you're on your feet, whatever. I'm talking about the school day. Is it sedentary or is it active? And I would say it's sedentary in the main. What about work? Now, obviously, if you're a farmer, you're pretty active. If you're a gym instructor, you're active. But work, on average, is sedentary. So the point I'm making here is that a society is structured around sedentary activities, and we have to change that and find a lifestyle that works with that combination. Oh, I needed that sip of tea. Hang on. Now, what are the outcomes? Well, we feel excessively tired if we are sedentary. We gain weight, obesity. Remember, obesity is BMI. I shouldn't use this colour. BMI of greater than 30. I'll just go over that for you. BMI of greater than 30 is what we mean by obesity. We might experience coronary heart disease, things like atherosclerosis, angina. We might have hypertension. This is chronic high blood pressure. Now, obviously, all of these things happen over time, folks. It's not all in one go. It's done over time. Diabetes, and let's call it type 2 diabetes, develops where the pancreas and the regulation of blood sugar through insulin and glucagon, and you guys, I know you study this in your biology, that becomes less and less efficient, and we have to support the body in doing that. We might also sleep less well. That might, of course, lead to our lethargy, and we might feel worse about ourselves. Now, of course, not all of these things happen quickly, not all of these things happen in each individual, but there is a tendency for these things to be more common in people that are sedentary. Therefore, it's something for us to consider. Now then, we're very nearly there, folks. I just want to talk to you quickly about the effects of dehydration before we finish this off. Now, we're obviously going to talk about dehydration, but I'm going to give a fairly bland definition of dehydration. We're going to call it a lack of water balance. And I'm going to say sufficient sufficient to affect cellular function. Now, you guys know a lot about cells, probably most, forgive me P teachers, you guys in your GCSE biology probably know more about cells, cellular function than a lot of P teachers will know. So I feel bad about that comment already. However, the point I want to make, just a very, very simple, think about your cytoplasms, think about your plasma in the blood, think about all these factors that require water to contain, like cytoplasm. You know that's where the cell activity goes on. You know that cytoplasm is there to suspend organelles. Without that, cells can't function properly, and therefore we need hydration, and dehydration occurs when we don't have enough. Now, I'm going to give you a little bit of teaching on this. This is really a revision session, obviously, but I just want to go through something here. If we experience a lot of sweating and we don't replace with water, we could get blood thickening, increased blood viscosity. Viscosity means thickness, and I want to show you something. I don't normally draw it. I'm only going to sketch this. This here is a heart rate response graph. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got time, and here we've got heart rate in beats per minute. I'm only going to sketch this, okay? And what I want you to imagine is that this here is rest, and then this person starts to exercise, and they're on their training run. Now, what I want you to realise is that over here, this is the end of their training run. Now, they're not going to run faster here. They're going at a nice steady state. But what's going to happen is their heart rate is going to start going up to here, even though, and then they get to the end of exercise, and then of course we get recovery. So my question to you is, why is that heart rate going up there? Why? Why is that drifting upwards? And the reason that's happening is because the blood is getting thicker, it's getting more viscous. Now, what that does, you see here, we've got reduction in blood flow. In other words, we've got reduced stroke volume. Now, you guys know that if we come back to our equation of cardiac output, I'll write it out for you, cardiac output equals stroke volume times heart rate. Well, if what we're saying is if the stroke volume is declining because we've got thick blood, what's got to happen? Heart rate's got to go up, and it's got to drift upwards. And the point to stress here, guys, is from here, this person is not running harder. This person is doing the same amount of work, but their heart rate has got to go up as a result. So we've got that reduction in blood flow to working muscles. We've got an increased heart rate. I've just demonstrated that to you. The body temperature goes up. We might overheat, become faint, pass out, being able to carry on. We get an increased reaction time. Remember, this is bad. Increase in this case, we get slower. We make poor decisions. We get cramps and fatigue, and so on. Now, to finish this day off, let's do the following. Let's do this. Let's take a bunch of our effects of dehydration and say what the consequence is. So we've got blood thickening, slows blood flow, reducing blood flow to the working muscles. Now, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go to up arrow. Therefore, we get an increase in heart rate. Now, what are the consequences of this? Well, one of them is we get a reduced heart rate range. Think about this a second. If my steady state running for me as a person is 150 beats per minute, that's when I'm just running and I'm not dehydrated. And my maximum heart, so this is steady state running for me. Well, that's about right for me actually. Steady state running. And let's say my maximum heart rate, my max HR, let's just say that mine is 180. You see, I've got 30 beats per minute above my sort of steady state to my maximum. Well, if my heart rate starts to go up, it's consuming that sort of reserve. It's taking that away. And what that is indicative of is I'm doing more work anaerobically. Obviously, go back to paper one to be thinking about that. Now, the other thing is that as a result of this, we reach fatigue earlier. And I want to be really clear about something for teachers who are watching this as well. I don't mean earlier in time, I mean earlier in intensity. Okay, so we would fatigue at a lower intensity of exercise because of that. Now then, let's go to the next one. We get an increase in, I'm going to put body temp. Now, actually, this can be quite facilitating, can be quite useful. However, it can lead to overheating in extreme cases. Okay, so think about a hot, humid day, running a marathon, that sort of thing. We might get decreased in efficiency of energy release. Now, I'm not going to get into this here, but go back to your studies on the effect of temperature on enzymes that you've studied in your biology. Obviously, if things get really, really hot, those enzymes denature and they can't perform their function. Same, obviously, in the human body, right? That's what's going to happen. We also get an increased dehydration rate. When we are in very hot conditions or we feel hot, the rate that we dehydrate is quicker, and therefore that's a problem. And then finally, last point of the day, we've got an increase in reaction time. Well, that's good, isn't it? No. This is bad. We are effectively slowing down. Therefore, what do we get? We get blunt reactions. Maybe our opponent gets the better of us more often. We, air quotes, lose battles, not literally, but those sort of one-to-ones with our opponents or whatever. And one of the ways I think is nice to sort of summarise this, a person can be, air quotes, beaten to the punch. Now, obviously, that could be related to boxing, but it could simply be that we don't get to a tackle or a breakdown quickly enough, that we don't respond to a serve rapidly enough. Whatever it happens to be, we're beaten to the punch, and therefore we're easier to beat. And one of the things that's interesting about sport is that when you're not at your best, it doesn't mean that only you performing worse. It means that your opponent doesn't have to perform as well to succeed, and that's something for you to consider. I think we're done.
Whew. There we go. We made it.
Yes.
3 hours straight. I know you guys only did an hour and a half, but 3 hours straight. We did Edexcel before, so it's been a bit of a whopper of an afternoon. We've also got 2 sessions tomorrow: OCR, GCSE, and Edexcel A-level paper 2, and then on Thursday we've got AQA A-level paper 2 and OCR A-level paper 2, leaving only OCR A-level for the very final session next week. Marta, any questions or requests?
Yes,
or
one question. Can you please clarify why the heart rate went up on that graph?
Yeah. So what we showed there was the idea that exercise intensity was continuous, so there was no increase in intensity, but we had an increase in heart rate towards maximum heart rate despite no increase in intensity. And the reason that was occurring was because the individual representing the graph was experiencing dehydration. Their blood plasma levels were lower, the blood was more viscous, thick, sticky. Therefore, the stroke volume, amount of blood leaving the heart per contraction, decreased. So to maintain cardiac output, heart rate had to increase. And there's a whole sort of negative feedback loop for those of you that have studied that in your biology that actually controls and senses those things. So we don't touch on that in this particular course, but if you were to go into A-level, it would be actually, how does that actually occur? Some interesting stuff in there actually. So that's why there's a simultaneous rise in heart rate because of an inverse proportionate decrease in stroke volume because the blood is thick and more viscous. That's why we actually call it cardiovascular drift, if anybody really wants to know that for future reference. Again, we studied that on A-level, so we'll look in a bit more detail. So it's actually an interesting phenomenon. So yeah, any other questions or thoughts or requests, Marta? Shall I check a bit of social before we sign off, just in case we've missed anybody?
No, I don't think we haven't got. We haven't got any other messages.
Okay, so guys, in that case, we're going to sign off. I hope that's been useful for you, both the paper 1 session and that paper 2 session. I hope the fact that we've sort of tried to focus on the skills as much as the content is going to prove valuable to you. I realise that means that you guys can't just pick up and go. You have to write more and think more, but that's how you perform better in exams. So hopefully that's relevant to you. We're really proud of the stuff we're putting out, and hopefully it's going to have an impact for you guys. When you do the exam for paper 2, if you find that this was useful or indeed not, let us know. Come back and tell us what you think could be different or better for next year's year 11s and people coming through. We really would like to hear from you students as to what your experience of these sessions were and how we can refine them. But with that in mind, I shall wish you the very best for all of your exams, and and I hope it goes really well for you, including the PE paper 2, which is, I can't remember when it is. It's sometime next week, isn't it? I can't remember which day. I'm not going to try and guess what day it is. I know it's next week, but I just can't remember what day it is. We've got our revision and exam calendar out there. Go and have a look.
There's so many exams.
It's got ridiculous.
It's impossible to keep track.
Yeah, it's got silly. 22 sessions we've done. Anyway, good stuff. Have a brilliant evening. What's on telly tonight? Hang on, Tuesday. I don't know anything that's on telly tonight. Is there possibly some cricket?
These young people don't watch live telly, do they?
No, they don't. No,
unless it's
and they're revising.
Exactly, all day, every day.
So they're going nowhere near Prime, Netflix, or Apple TV for sure. All right, guys, have a great one. Take it easy. We'll just play out with a little bit of music, and then we are going to sign off. Cheers, guys.